Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Magztv, or click the link in the video description down below. G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome back to War Thunder Naval Battles. Yes, this weekend had yet another naval test, and this one I actually had the opportunity to get onto. Now, there's a couple of things with this. Because I've missed the last couple of tests, I do not know if they were unique to this test, or whether or not they were implemented in previous tests, but I'm going to be blunt. This test was not good. In previous tests, whether or not you've liked or not liked the game mode that Gaijin is putting together here in terms of naval battles has been largely subjective. Some people have really liked the idea, some people haven't, but for the most part, from a mechanical and design standpoint, the game has functioned and worked as you would expect it to. That is to say, you point the guns at the ship, you pull the trigger, the guns fire, the shells hit the ship providing you aim well enough. The spawn placement was good enough and the speeds of the ships were slow enough to prevent spawn camping for the most part until the final stages of any given match, preventing anybody from being able to swarm a position. In much the same way that this usually happens in tank battles, towards the end, the enemy team tends to push past the objectives and get to the spawns. It all worked in pretty much the same way. However, in this test, it didn't. Now, during the course of these clips that I'm about to show, you'll occasionally see the chat window pop up. This is actually problem number one that I found. I have my War Thunder set so that it will not display chat messages unless I hit the enter key or in some way bring the chat window up. This is set in the options and it is fine in tank and aircraft battles. However, in naval battles, this feature seems to be overridden and the chat window will pop up all on its own, regardless of whether or not you actually tell it to or not. A minor complaint, but I do like my options to actually work and do as is intended. But regardless, trying to snipe shots on this destroyer. Now, the first thing you would have noticed, besides the Corsair blowing up the ship and in the process blowing himself up with the bomb, where did any of the shells that I was firing just then land? Did you see any splashes? Any indication that these shells were actually landing in the area that I was aiming at? They weren't, and I wasn't the only person having this problem. It looks like they've made some changes to the aiming system. For starters, you've got the large target reticle. I don't particularly like those. I don't think they look that attractive. I preferred the smaller individual circles for the guns as was in the previous tests that I actually played, but again, it's just an appearance thing. It doesn't really matter in the long run so long as they worked, and this is where the problem lies. They didn't. I'm going to flick over to a clip from a later battle than this one. So in this battle, I'm sailing out Germany's destroyer. I can't actually remember the name of it, if I'm honest, and I was trying to aim directly at the ships. Should be able to hit perfectly fine. And the shells are going absolutely nowhere where I intended them to either. Now I want you to watch the aiming reticle, where I'm aiming the mouse, and where the shells actually land on this shot. There we go, my first hit. Now, the first thing I want to take out of the equation here is auto-aiming. Now, if the guns on these ships were auto-targeting, I should be able to put the target reticle directly over top of the ship, and the guns will automatically calculate for lead and angle and so on in order to be able to put the shells in front of the target. I don't really like that style of shooting, but if that was the case, then this should be as simple as putting that reticle on the ship and pulling the trigger. Clearly that's not the case, so we can take that out of the equation straight away. Now, the problem here should be obvious to everybody, but I'm going to break it down piece by piece, just so we can see exactly how bad this is. So whenever you're aiming at a target, especially something like a ship, you need to know its direction of travel, and you can tell this by looking at the ship's hull directly. So, according to the attitude of the ship's hull in relation to us, it should be heading on this vector. So while naval guns aren't 100% accurate, putting the centralized point for the aiming of all the guns somewhere along that line should get the shells at least on the path the ship is taking. But of course the ship is moving forward and our guns have a time to target. The shells don't deliver immediately. So of course now we need to lead the target based on how fast we think the target is moving and how long it will take our shells to complete their arc and deliver themselves to the point that we're aiming at. So my rough estimate would be that we needed to aim somewhere about here. Which would make sense. We're shooting at the front of a ship that's moving forward, and we're counting for a lead time, and we're also counting for our distance as well. So that should be roughly, it may not be perfect, but roughly the area we should have been aiming the guns at in order to be able to hit that ship at the point we did. So tell me, why the living hell is my mouse cursor down here and the gun's aiming reticle all the way over here? This makes absolutely no sense. Now, I thought for a moment that, well, I thought a couple of things. Maybe I had somehow selected the targeting system for a different set of weapons, because there are multiple weapons on these ships. So I tried switching between the different weapons to see whether or not we could get anything to line up. Nothing lined up. At all, in the slightest. So I thought, well, maybe they put in some new options within the options menu, and considering that there is some new information regarding to the acquired target now on screen, maybe it's sort of like armor, where you have to adjust the sights based on the range you're trying to fire at. So I went through the options menu to look through and see if there was anything that I could use to adjust the sighting. Maybe they've made it so you have to manually calculate the trajectory of your shells to be able to hit the target. That would actually have been kind of cool if they had done that. Nothing. The guns just don't aim anywhere near where you're telling them to, and the shells don't go anywhere near where the guns appear to be aimed at. Nothing is lined up. So using these guns at long ranges to engage other destroyers is guesswork, trial and error at best, and this is how you had to play. And what was more noticeable was that once you got within about 500 meters to the target, the guns did actually start becoming more accurate, as if the guns were fixed for around a 500 meter sight range with no way of actually adjusting them. I will say, just interrupting myself here, I did like what Gaijin has done with smoke here. I think this is really cool, and this was actually a really practical usage for the PT boats that I hadn't seen before, that I very, very, very much liked. But anyways, back to the first battle. So in this battle I never really got an opportunity to demonstrate what I just shown, but this battle showed a whole other issue, and this was an issue of map design regarding the Fiji map. Now in this particular test, a point system for ground vehicles, for the ships, for the PT boats, is now in play. Now it always sort of was, but the only thing it really prevented you from being able to bring out in the past was the aircraft, and for good reason. Aircraft bombs were absolutely lethal. An interesting thing to note about the guns here, you'll notice that providing I don't use the long-range rangefinder, instead just zoom in and aim manually from standard third-person view, the shells go exactly where they're being aimed. It's only the rangefinder or the scope view where the guns are inaccurate, as I demonstrated. But anyways, as I was saying, they've introduced a point system on this particular test. It may have been in the previous ones, but as I said, I missed the last couple of tests. So, the points cost for this particular system was 1,950 spawn points to get the Fletcher out, or the destroyer out of your choice. It was the same for all the destroyers. 3,000 points to get out the dive bomber, 1,500 points to get out the fighter, and the PT boat was free to deploy. This makes sense. You don't want the aircraft coming out, so it makes sense that they're so expensive. The fighter is less dangerous than the dive bomber, and you don't want everyone just spamming the destroyers. You do want people to drive the PT boats in order to see whether or not they're going to perform against the destroyers in battle. And this was a beautiful shot, torpedoing a PT boat. Boom. Anyways, the point system makes sense. I'm not a fan of the point systems, but I can understand why they're in place in terms of the test. That's fine. What this does mean is as people lose their destroyers earlier on due to torpedoes or attack or dive bombing or whatever else is going on, as people who chose to use their initial points to deploy a fighter rather than a destroyer lose their vehicles, they're going to spawn in on the PT boats because they're free and they're the only vehicle that's left. This makes sense. So, let's look at the design of this island. You can see there are 6 spawn points on this map. There is one in the north, one in the south, one in the east, one in the west. The south and east spawn points belong to one team, the north and west spawn points belong to the other, and then there is a northern and southern spawn in the center of the map. Now these spawns are inside the island, right on either side of the A cap. These spawn points can only be used for spawning PT boats. No other vehicles can spawn there, and I can see the logic that Gaijin was going for here. By limiting what vehicles can spawn on these points, it means that nobody can spawn a destroyer into the center of the map and start ripping everybody up. But again, this does cause a problem. Because keep in mind, these PT boats aren't defenseless. In fact, you're about to see me get taken out right now. This torpedo, initially I'm going to survive, but the damage overall is going to be overwhelming. And you can see I'm being hit by multiple torpedo boats over and over again, trying to push in to secure this A cap. And while the PT boats can basically be one shot at medium ranges by my guns, or even long ranges, you'll notice at short ranges the guns become much harder to use against them. They don't track as well, they can't get the depression. I completely agree with this, by the way. This is how it should be in order to gain a little bit of balance for PT boats. If they can get close to you, you're in a world of trouble. And of course, PT boats have torpedoes. If you let them get close, they can take you out. A single PT boat can do significant amounts of damage if you can't defend against it. So, what happens when the only spawn point for the only vehicle you can deploy when you run out of points is in an isolated area centralized to all the cap circles? Well, this is what happens. Believe it or not, our team was actually winning here in overall kills, but we're losing on points because every single time we destroyed an enemy vehicle, they simply spawned a PT boat until we ran into a situation where all 16 PT boats were sitting in the center of the map, excluding one guy who was floating around in this BF-109, just driving back and forth between the 3 cap points, torpedoing anything that came in. And of course, because these 2 spawn points are so close together, as soon as you spawned in a PT boat of your own, you were immediately under fire from multiple enemy vehicles on all sides that had swarmed out. The map was designed in such a way, and I think I torpedoed myself there, not that it was actually going to make much of a difference. The map's actually designed in such a way that it is actually a good thing to lose the initial engagement because it allows your team to mass swarm PT boats on the cap circles and to camp out the enemy team's PT boat spawn point, preventing them from being able to do the same. Any destroyers coming in to try and take the cap circles as is needed will immediately be hit by multiple torpedoes being destroyed in a very short period of time, and while aircraft can come through and strafe the PT boats out relatively easily, they have no spawn cost, so you just spawn another one. Or at least up until the point that you run out of spawns, which I believe the maximum spawn count was 4. In total, during this test, I played 10 battles. In the course of those 10 battles, I started off with engagements like this, where the groups were already swarming in the center. The last battle I played, the enemy team didn't even go through the pretense of attempting to spawn destroyers. 16 PT boats took 3 cabs and then sat in the center of the map, and you could not dislodge them. Now what's interesting is you would have been able to solve this problem if you could have parked a destroyer at the outside of the B or C cap points and used your rangefinders to engage the swarm of PT boats that had formed around the A and central point of the map from long range, outside of the effective range of their torpedoes and their guns, taking them out in order to clear out the swarm and just shut this tactic down before it starts. But of course the rangefinder isn't accurate and actually requires a lot of work to hit something the size of a destroyer. Try to hit something like a high-speed maneuvering PT boat with guns that you have to aim in completely the wrong direction in order to be able to get them anywhere near the target to begin with. Oh, and it is also worth noting that the rangefinder on the PT boats works absolutely fine. In fact, it was so accurate that I was able to accurately hit the forward turret on this destroyer with no problems whatsoever. I'm really not entirely sure what Gaijin was up to with this particular test, but there was so many little things wrong with it, it was just frustrating to play. And as I said, after about 10 battles, I just called it quits. There was just no point in continuing to play it at this kind of a state. At this point, Naval Battles has already received a lot of criticisms on how it actually operates, and Gaijin is doing what it can to try and improve it, or at least has been for the most part. These are the kind of things that shouldn't be popping up in tests. These are the kind of things that should have been noticed and dealt with in internal testing long before we ever actually saw it. So that's really all there was to cover in this particular test. There was no point in looking at the ships. The guns wouldn't work correctly on them to get a really good feel for them anyway, and as I said, it was just frustrating to play. I'll poke my head in on the next naval test. Hopefully things will have improved then, but we shall wait and see. Anyways, ladies and gents, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you would like to help support the channel, please feel free to check out my sponsor Audible in the video description down below. Fantastic service. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel directly, the links to my Patreon are down there as well, and a reminder to everybody, I do now stream on Twitch, so you'll find links to my Twitch channel in the video description down below as well. So until next time, ladies and gents, click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, take care.